Who here likes cars? Into cars? Yeah, a little bit. I grew up in the boonies. If you haven't known that by now, I grew up in like the, backwoods, Pennsylvania, South Central PA, and back in Pennsylvania, it was a big deal. You were either a Ford guy or you were a Chevy guy. And like people would get mad. Like, my family, we were Ford people, okay? So like you drove a Chevy, we disown you. Like it was that intense. So anyway, if you don't know much about Henry Ford, he changed the game as far as automobiles and pretty much everything else was made. He came up with this thing called the assembly line. The assembly line. You know that there was 84 steps to make a car back then. It's funny to think about, right? Not much to them, but 84 steps to make a car. And so instead of like everyone making a car, he came up with this idea, well, why don't everyone just does a step? And we'll see how fast that we can make cars. And it actually reduced the time to make a car, think about this, from 12 hours to 1 hour and 33 minutes. Through the assembly line. Crazy. And this really ushered in an era of mass production. If you know history, everything started to be made then in factories and conveyor belts and lots of workers, right? And while, some things are certainly still made like that today, I think it's largely been changed now. And we emphasize customization now. That's a big thing. Right? Think about it. The things that you buy used to be mass-produced. Relatively, they were all the same, had kind of all the same features. Now you can customize just about everything when you're having it made, right? I mean, they build houses today, but I have friends who build a new house, and you can literally pick out every feature that you want, and they'll customize the house the way you like it. Even a car now, you can get online, order your car to the specs that you want. I mean, you can customize your own shoes. You know that? You send in a mold of your foot, they'll make your own shoe for you. I mean, it's crazy. You can customize your own clothes, your own beach towels, your own blanket, your own playing cards. I saw over online this week that you can actually even customize your own fortune cookies. Now, how fun would that be? Oh, I'm watching you. So all kinds of good messages, right? In the fortune cookie, that would be fun. But anyway, Henry Ford, he had this assembly line. Now we customize a lot of things, right? And as I was thinking about this idea of customization, I thought, I wonder if we were offered the opportunity to make our own God, what would it look like? What would it look like? I mean, if we could fashion a God to meet our needs and our desires and our wants and the way that we want things to go, what would that God look like? I mean, this isn't really a new concept, right? I mean, human beings have been designing their own gods for as long as sin has entered the world. We've done this, right? Jeremiah 16:20, look at it. It says, "Do people make their own gods? Yes, but they are not gods." That's what it says. So after today, I hope that you will understand that the God that we serve is the God no one would make. In other words, if we could customize our own God, which we do it all the time, right? Our God, if we could do that, our God would look nothing like the one true God. Because that God, the one true God, is so counterintuitive to our way of thinking. We could never design him on our own. It would be so contrary to what we want as human beings. Isaiah 55 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." That's why we could never design the God who is in heaven and the one true God. So go ahead and turn your Bibles to Mark chapter 8. This is part 3 of our Christmas series called Transformed. And the message for today is called The God No One Would Make. The God no one would make. So if you were here last week's message largely centered around a question that Jesus asked his disciples in Mark 8, verse 17. He asked them, do you not yet understand? Do you not yet understand? But after the repeated touch of Jesus, remember we saw last week that understanding is a gift from God. We only understand because God allows us and opens our eyes to see. But after this repeated touch of Jesus, the question, do you not yet understand, is finally resolved by Peter in the passage for today. Let's look at it. Mark 8:27. And Jesus went on with the disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they told him, John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets. And he asked them, but who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, you are the Christ. And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. Now, as I said last week, right, this understanding that we get from God is not manufactured on our own. And so in Peter, he didn't just kind of manufacture this understanding or belief in God all of a sudden. It was given to him by God. The Gospel of Matthew spells this out. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. That's who revealed it. That's who gave Peter this understanding, okay? So Mark is writing this. He's writing in this way to show us that Peter, after all of that, he couldn't understand, he lacked understanding, he lacked belief. After all of that, Mark is now showing us that Peter finally understood it. He was blind, but now he finally saw. Now he finally understood it all, right? Right? Right. Well, Peter, he did understand. I mean, what he said was correct. Jesus blessed him for it, right? I mean, he blessed him for it. He said, on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I mean, he blessed Peter for this confession that he is the Christ. He did understand, but he still didn't understand, as we'll see shortly after this happens. I said this last week, and it's so true of the passage for today. When we start thinking we are understanding things more, we quickly discover that we may understand things less. When we start thinking we're getting ahead, we quickly discover that we may be more behind than ever. When we start thinking we're making all this progress and we're getting somewhere, something happens to make us wonder if we're really getting anything at all, right? And this is exactly what happens with Peter. We focus on the passage where Peter confesses Christ, and we're like, wow, what a triumph of this guy. He finally got it. Be like Peter. Well, do you read the next verse? Because look what happened to him. And Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. So in an extremely short amount of time, Peter goes from this blessing from Jesus. Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. Wow, it's revealed it to you. Blessed are you. And now, moments later, he's getting rebuked. Get behind me, Satan. I mean, that's because, listen, Peter understood, but he didn't yet understand. I know it sounds kind of weird, but it's true. He understood, but he still didn't quite understand. He understood and even proclaimed that Jesus was the Messiah. He was right, it was correct. But here's the thing. He didn't yet understand what exactly the Messiah came to do. See, after Peter proclaims Jesus as the Messiah, Jesus then begins to start to explain and describe exactly what he as the Messiah came to do. And this is what he says. He as the Messiah, he says the Messiah must, he said must, what? Suffer, be rejected, and be killed. And you notice in your Bibles it says he said this to them plainly. He wanted them plainly to understand this. Wait, this can't be right though. No. Go back and check some things here. The Messiah came to be triumphant, right? Messiah came to be triumphant. He didn't come to suffer. He came to reign. The Messiah was coming now to reign, not be rejected. What are you talking about? He came to be victorious. He didn't come to die. That's what Peter's thinking. When he pulls Jesus aside, he says, hey, Jesus, come here. Now, hey, Jesus, you know that I believe you're the Messiah. I just said that. I got it. I believe it. But, hey, I think you might have gotten something wrong here, though, right? People are going to start, talking about us if you start saying things like, you came to suffer and be rejected and die. That's not it. That's not right. You're the Messiah who came to save us. And to that, Jesus looks at him and says, get behind me, Satan. Wow. See, Jesus understood what the Messiah came to do. It was his God-ordained purpose to suffer, to be rejected, to die. So in this moment when Peter, unknowingly, he's trying to lead Jesus away from his God-ordained purpose and God-ordained mission, Jesus remembers the time when someone else tried to do the exact same thing. Matthew chapter 4, again, the devil took him. The devil took Jesus to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these I will give you if you just fall down and worship me. You don't have to suffer. You don't have to be rejected. You don't have to die. Just bow down and worship me. See, in the wilderness, Satan tried to lure Jesus away from his God-ordained purpose. This was the very God-ordained meaning for Jesus' life and mission. And listen to me, Jesus' God-ordained mission in life was not victory and success. It wasn't. It was, as Jesus said, rejection, suffering, and death. That's what he said. And so here's the thing, listen to me. If we are followers of Jesus, say, I follow Jesus, then what is the God-ordained meaning for our life? Is it victory and success? Is it power and influence? Is it strength and popularity? Maybe not. Jesus spells this out for us next. And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father and with the holy angels. So if we are followers of Jesus, then what is the God-ordained meaning of our life and mission? Is it victory and success? Well, it looks like it may be more like rejection and suffering and death. The great theologian, my favorite theologian, by the way, if you're looking for a Christmas present, I love Martin Luther. He's my favorite. He answered this question with one of the most important theological concepts of all time. Okay, hear me out. It's one of the most important theological concepts of all time. Luther said, we either have a theology of glory or a theology of the cross. And we're gonna spell all of this out here in the next several minutes. You either have a theology of glory or you either have a theology of the cross, okay? Let's start with a theology of glory, all right? Let's start with a theology of glory. Gwen's favorite ride, one of her favorite rides, she has a lot. She always tells me this is my favorite ride. And then there's another one. But one of her favorite rides at Disney World is called a Carousel of Progress, the Carousel of Progress. You ever ride that one before? It's an old one, old Disney. Well, it takes you through all of these different decades and shows you how life has progressed through all of the different decades. And the idea behind it is to inspire you to believe that life will continue to progress, right? It sings this song, ready? There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow shining at the end of every day. There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, and tomorrow, it's only a dream away. Yes. See, our world is all about progress, right? We emphasize this. There's technological progress, there's intellectual progress, there's personal progress, because here's the idea. The more progress there is in our lives, the better our lives will be. That's the idea, right? That's the idea of the ride. See, we used to have to put our milk in this ice box, and now we have a refrigerator. Isn't progress great? It's made our lives so much better, right? Now, while it's true that who's thankful for refrigerators, I know I am, okay? Progress in this sense does make our lives better. There's no doubt about that. Unfortunately, though, this same mindset has made its way into our theology, into what we believe about God. It's given us a theology of glory that says our Christian life is also all about progress. Here's what I'm saying. It says the more we progress in our faith, the more we progress in our obedience, the more we progress in what we can give back to God, well then the more God's gonna bless us. Okay? The more faithful that we are to God, then the more faithful God will be to us. A theology of glory says the more that we do, the more faithful we are, the more we obey God, the better our lives are gonna be. And if you're a parent, you can have that same thinking with your kids. The more I put into them, the more I do with them, well then the better they're gonna turn out, right? Right? It's called a theology of glory because all this progress that we're so focused on making in our lives, so our lives will be better, right? All this progress we focus on making in our lives, it's all about us. It's all about us. It's all for our own glory. When we have a theology of glory, we believe that our lives will be better. In other words, God will love us more and reward us more because of what we do, because of how faithful we are, because of the progress that we make. Look at me, God. Look how much better I've become. Now it's time for you to reward me with an easy life and all this kind of stuff. So our lives quickly become all about what we do and how we're advancing and how good we get at obeying God and how faithful we are to God, how much progress we make. Focus is all on our works and our progress, so much to the point that we begin to think that we're the ones doing the progressing. It's by our strength and by our power that we're really accomplishing something. That's what a theology of glory does to us. But who's ready to eat some humble pie today? You ready? Me included. I wonder, how much progress are you actually making? Novelist Jonathan Franzen, he said this is so good. We have this notion in this country not only of endless economic growth, but of endless personal growth. I have a certain characterological antipathy, that's a big word. I have a certain aversion or a disagreement, that's what it means, to the notion that we're all getting better and better all the time. And it's so clearly disproved by our experience. Listen to this. You may get better in certain ways for 10 years, but one day you wake up, and although things are a little bit different, they're not a lot different. See, when we have this theology of glory, we think that we're the ones progressing and we're the ones getting ourselves better. But let's get real. I mean, how much progress are you really making? I'm sorry. I mean, I've been a Christian as long as I can remember, okay? I mean, I've been to church every Sunday just about since I was born. I mean, really. I mean, I've been there. I mean, I read my Bible, I pray, I teach Bible studies, I volunteer, I preach messages, I counsel people. I'm even the lead pastor of this church. Uh-oh. But I gotta be honest with you. This is just me. Though I've probably, hopefully gotten better in some ways over the course of my life, right, Wendy? A little bit better? A little bit better? I've gotten a little bit better in certain areas of my life. You know something? I still struggle in the same exact ways I did 5, 10, 20 years ago. Thank you. It's the same. It's the same. I mean, how much progress are we really making? I mean, we put so much emphasis on our works and what we can do. Are you really getting that much better? Right? I mean, you may get better in certain ways for 10 years, but one day you wake up and although things are a little bit different, they're not a lot different. You may have adjusted some outward behaviors throughout the years, and that's a great thing. I'm not belittling that at all, okay? You should. You know, behavior changes as you believe in God. That's not what I'm saying. But here is what I'm saying. How's your heart doing? What are your thoughts still like? Are you really progressing that much when you start thinking about that? About how far you've fallen short? Every day of your life, your heart is not in tune. Your thoughts are not in tune to Him. We all struggle with this. Gerhard Ford wrote this. He wrote, "A theology of glory operates on the assumption that all we need is some optimistic encouragement, some flattery, some positive thinking, some support to build our self-esteem. Theologically speaking, it operates on the assumption that we are not seriously addicted to sin and that our improvement, our progress is both necessary and possible. All we need is a little boost in our desire to do good works. But the hallmark, listen to me, of a theology of glory is that it will always consider grace as something of a supplement to whatever is left of human will and power." In other words, a theology of glory has this mindset, well, you know what? After I give my best effort, actually, after I do more, try harder, and try to get better, after all that stuff, after I've made as much progress as I possibly can, well, then that's when grace comes in and kind of takes me to the finish line. Or that's when grace comes in and just fills in all the cracks that I wasn't perfect along the way, but I got pretty far on my own. But grace then comes in and just, makes it better, makes it perfect. It will always consider grace as something of a supplement to whatever is left of human will and power. But grace isn't a supplement. It's the whole thing. All of it. There's no supplement. See, maybe having a theology of glory has misled you to not understand what progress in the Christian life actually is, because the world has made its way into our theology. Listen, the Christian life is not about progressing in our capabilities. It's not. It's about progressing in our need for Him. The Christian life isn't about doing more and trying harder so everything gets better. It's about dying to yourself and learning to live by grace alone. Not of your effort at all, by grace alone. That's what it is. Calling to the crowd, he said, if anyone would come after me, what did he say? Let him deny himself, all of it, and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life, whoever, tries to do all these things and progress will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake in the Gospels will save it. Now, quick side point so you understand what this means. Jesus paid for your sins in full, right? It's finished. Taking up your cross does not mean that, you're still suffering under the weight of the sin or trying to earn back or being punished for your sins. That's not what it means. Jesus removed your sins from you as far as the east is from the west. They're gone. You're not suffering under them. Taking up your cross daily, what Jesus is talking about here, it simply means acknowledging your own weakness. It's acknowledging your own helplessness. It's saying every day, I got nothing, God. I got nothing. It's acknowledging the failure and the inconsistency of your works, anything that you do, and understanding that none of it counts for anything. Did you hear what I said? It doesn't count for anything. Nothing at all. See, a theology of glory says the more I do, the more faithful I am, the more progress I make, well, the better my life's gonna get. So here's the danger. We'll even start thinking that because we're doing so good and because we're making so much progress and because now God's gonna be more faithful to me, right? Here's the problem. We'll start believing that we're in control. Look at me, God. Didn't you promise me this, God? So when it doesn't happen, we have a crisis. Because isn't this supposed to be the way it worked? No, I did all these things for you, God. This shouldn't be happening to me. Wait a minute here. See the danger of a theology of glory? You start thinking that you're the one in control. But there's a theology of the cross that says this: take up your cross daily. Die to yourself. Your progress, you gotta die to your progress. You gotta die to your glory. You gotta die to any notion that you can do anything to earn favor in the sight of God. That's what it is. And a theology of the cross, you know what it will do? It will cause you to follow and rely totally on Him, because you have nowhere else to go. And then when you do that, it isn't contingent on the outcomes, because you're following and relying on Him no matter what life brings you. That's a theology of the cross. See, and that's why if we as human beings had the opportunity to customize or make our own God, we're left to our own thinking, ways of understanding, we wouldn't make anything like the God we know. We wouldn't make anything like the God I just described. Listen to me, here's what I think. The God we'd make would reward those who obey Him and punish those who don't. The God we make would make sure that life went well for those who are faithful and not so well for those who are unfaithful. The God we make would set the standard for us to strive toward and expect us to do what we can to meet it. And He'd cheer us on when we're doing good and be disappointed in us when we're not doing so good. The God we'd make would call the struggling, he'd say they're too weak. He'd call the doubters, now they're too flaky. He'd call the disobedient, now they're too undisciplined. And he'd call the unfortunate, he'd say, well, they're too lazy. The God we'd make would be proud of us when we're obeying him and be disappointed in us when we're not. The God we'd make would make us pay back what we owe to him. The God we'd make would be found in the highest of highs. He'd never be found in the lowest of lows. See, the God we'd make, he'd have a theology of glory. He wouldn't have a theology of the cross. But listen to what Martin Luther said. Listen to me. He said, God can be found only in suffering and the cross. Did you hear what I said? God can be found only in suffering and the cross. It is impossible for a person not to be puffed up by his good works unless he has first been deflated and destroyed by suffering and evil until he knows that he is worthless and that his works are not his but God's. Wow. Let me read it again. It is impossible for a person not to be puffed up by his good works unless he has first been deflated and destroyed by suffering and evil until he knows that he is worthless and that his works are not his but God's. So here's what that means for us today. God is found in our weakness. God is found in our failure. God is found in our pain. He's found in our struggles. He's found in our brokenness. He's even found in the brokenness of the world. That is a theology of the cross. That we find him not in our progress, not in our successes, not in our works, but we find him in our suffering. We find him in our struggles. We find him in the broken and shattered pieces of our lives. Listen to this quote. God meets us in the low places. He meets us in the back alleys of our secrets, the dark corners of our regrets, the cracks of our fears. He comes to us in the wreckage of our consequences, in the debris of our repeated failures. We find God in our losses, in our suffering. He's right there in the middle of our dirtiness, not outside of it. Some people can't see God because they won't look low enough, but to find him, we must look lower. So what does all this mean for us? You know, a theology of the cross can sound like we're glorifying suffering in a sense, right? Or kind of that we should want to suffer, come on, bring on the suffering so I can finally understand it. Like, no, that's not it. Suffering is not a good thing. It's not. But look at Acts 2:23. But God knew what would happen, and his prearranged plan was carried out when Jesus was betrayed. With the help of lawless Gentiles, you nailed him to a cross and killed him. But God released from the horrors of death and raised him back to life, for death could not keep him in its grip. See, having a theology of the cross, it centers on the cross. And the cross, yes, it is a symbol of suffering and rejection and death. So, church, we should expect that in life. That's where God meets us. That's where he found us. That's where he saved us. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's where he meets us. But God, because of the work of Jesus, you know what the cross is also a symbol of? Of victory, of overcoming, and of hope. No, suffering, it's never a good thing. It's never, ever, ever, ever good. Whatever you're suffering through today, I tell you, it is not good. It's not a good thing. Just like the cross, it's not a good thing. It's not the symbol of what we believe because it's a good thing. It's not at all. It was a scandal for this perfect man to die on this cross. It wasn't a good thing at all. But the cross didn't end in defeat. It didn't end in defeat. It ended in victory. And that's why today that God reveals himself to us in our suffering, not in our progress, not in what we can do, not in how faithful we are to God. No. He comes to us and reveals himself to us in our pain, in our struggle, in our hurt, and in our failure. And we know today that when we suffer, and we will suffer, no matter how good you think you are, no matter how faithful you think you are, no matter how many good things you can point back to on your life and think that they're gonna spare you from some type of suffering, in this world you will have trouble. Oh, but take heart. I have overcome the world. I've overcome the world. And so that's why these words can mean so much for us. We rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. See, the God we would make, the God we would fashion for ourselves, and we have for centuries and centuries and centuries, thousands of years. And all the other gods of the world, there is no cross. There's only glory. That's because the God we would make for ourselves would not involve a cross. It would involve only glory. The God we would make, it would just take all the suffering away. And maybe you've been there. I know I've been there. If you're suffering, one of the first questions you ask, God, why don't you just take this away? It's because the God we would make would just take all this suffering away. But the God no one would make, our God, whose thoughts are higher than our thoughts and whose ways are higher than our ways, he does something even more powerful, and he does something even greater than just taking the suffering away. Do you know what our God can do? He's so powerful that he doesn't just take the suffering away. He can actually use it for his glory and his purpose. What kind of a God could do that? That could take what the enemy meant for evil and turn it for good. That's why we know that God works all things together for our good. That those who love him and know him, he can turn our suffering and transform them into things for his glory. Man, we could never make something like that up. Only God could do that. The God I know, the God we serve. And so I want to just speak to you who maybe are suffering today for whatever reason. Maybe it's a circumstance, maybe it's a struggle, an ongoing weakness, a failure that you can't seem to shake. Whatever it is today that you're struggling through, listen to me. God is in that struggle. He's not ashamed of it. He's there with you. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For I know that you are with me, and your rod and staff, and they comfort me, and you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. He can take what you're suffering with and somehow, some way, in the only way that he can, turn it for good and his glory and his purpose. In closing, I remembered the words of this classic hymn. It's been sang for many years. And it just so perfectly describes a theology of the cross. It says, so I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. It's not about my works. It's not about my progress. It's not about how good I can get. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown. And one of my favorite verses, it says, to the old rugged cross I will ever be true. Its shame and reproach gladly bear. Then he'll call me someday to my home far away, where his glory forever I'll share. You know, I wish I could make sense of what you're going through, but I can't. I wish I could make it all go away, but I'm not God, and neither are you. But around this time of year, suffering and pain in our lives, I think, can really be magnified, right? All of your weakness, all your failures, as you look upon this, what's supposed to be perfect Christmas celebration and everything, and everyone's perfect and dressed up, and everyone has a perfect family, and everyone looks all great and smiling. Everything that's gone on in your life that's not so good, it's really magnified and brought out to you even further. But today, that's for you. He didn't enter the world and snapped his fingers and fixed it. He entered in a dungeon, not even in. They didn't even have enough room. He entered into a nasty, dirty place with animals and the grunge of society. Some of the first people that came to see him were these rejected shepherds out in the field who nobody liked or cared about. They're the ones that came to give him praise and to give him glory. And this thing we do every week, it's not perfect, and it's not supposed to be. So why would you think your life is supposed to be that way? Your life is a mess. Mine's a mess. But listen to me. You're in good company, because that is where Jesus came. He came right into the mess. That's what Christmas is. He came right into the mess. Woo! But he didn't just leave it a mess. He died on the cross, and he's gonna make all things new. He's going to transform you into the very image of himself. That's what Christmas is all about. He came into the mess. He didn't seek glory by the way of force or by the way of, making everyone align perfectly to what he didn't do that. He came right into the mess. And church, because he did, he is the only one that all the earth will shout his praise.